Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your patience. Getting started just a little bit late, but we're going to try our best to stay on time today. This is the Georgia Medical Cannabis Study Committee, created out of Senate Resolution 981. We're glad to have you guys here. The medical cannabis issue has become one that has gotten a lot of attention, creates a lot of passion and diverse views among our citizens. The goal of this committee is to learn more about the issue. I think that during last session there was a clear evidence that there was a desire to see if it makes sense to give citizens in our state an option for medical cannabis, and so we're here to learn how to look at drafting the best infrastructure that we can for our citizens to provide access to medical cannabis, if that is the will of the legislative body and the governor. I would like to take just a brief moment to introduce some of our committee members. My name is Alan Peake, State Representative from Macon. I'm going to introduce the House members, and then I'll introduce my co-chair, who will introduce the Senate members. Rich Golick is to my left. He has been in the House for 16 years, represents the Smyrna and Vinings area, and chair of the Judiciary Non-Civil Committee. Micah Gravely, if you'll raise your hand, Micah, so people know who you are. He has been in the legislature for 2 years. He's in business development, represents the Douglas and Paulding County areas. And Margaret Kaiser, who's not here, she'll be here in just a moment, been in the legislature 8 years, represents the Atlanta and East Point. This is my co-chair, Renee Unterman from the Senate. You want to introduce your colleagues there?
Thank you, Representative Peake. I appreciate it. I'm Senator Renee Unterman, and I'm from Beaufort, Georgia, Senate District 45. And I'll let the senators introduce themselves. One's above me, one's below me, and one's way south of me. Senator Miller.
Butch.
I'm not sure if I'm above or below. I'm slightly west, I think. My name is Butch Miller, and I serve in the State Senate from the 49th District, and I'm from Hall County. And I'm pleased to be here today and look forward to a lot of meaningful discussion and investigation. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Dean Burke from the 11th District down in Southwest Georgia. I've been in the Senate for 2 years and serve on the Health Committee. Thank you.
I'm State Senator Kurt Thompson. I represent District 5 on the 85 corridor in Gwinnett County, and I've been in the state legislature 12 years.
Any other comments you want to make? And I'll introduce our other two members. We have two other members that are not elected officials that are on the committee as a result of SR 981. The first one is Chuck Spahos. Chuck, he's executive director of the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. He's been in law enforcement all his life, was assistant DA, Solicitor General for Henry County, provides a unique perspective for us from the law enforcement standpoint. And Dr. Matthews Gwynn, who is a neurologist in private practice, and he is our appointee from MAG, which is the Medical Association of Georgia. So we're glad to have these two gentlemen who are giving of their time freely, and we appreciate and look forward to the expertise that you provide to us. Just a couple of more housekeeping things. This is the first of 5 hearings that we'll have. The next one will be on September 10th in Macon on the Mercer University campus. We're going to hear from various different patients and families of citizens who have different diagnoses that are advocating for or against medical cannabis. On October 1st, we're going to meet up in Senator Unterman's district at Georgia Gwinnett College, where we'll hear from the law enforcement community about their issues and concerns about the medical cannabis issue. And then on October 22nd, we're going to be in Augusta at Georgia Regents University, where we're going to hear from the medical community about get their input, as well as hear an update. Many of you know Governor Deal showed some tremendous leadership in initiating an accelerated clinical trial process with a pharmaceutical group called GW Pharma and Epidiolex, which has shown promise for children with seizure disorders. We're going to learn about it, get an update from the GRU community about that, and then we'll wrap up on November 12th at the Georgia Capitol back here for a summary. Couple of house cleaning. We will not be having public testimony today. We have 3 invited guests who will be providing input to us. There will be a question and answer time from the members of the committee to the presenters. For any of you who have a desire to participate in hearings in the future, we are setting up those schedules. You can make comments or contact me on the Georgia Medical Cannabis Study Committee Facebook page. You can contact my office or Senator Unterman's office. You can go to www.lgis.ga.gov, which is the Georgia General Assembly website, and contact us from there. Obviously, we cannot hear from every citizen in the state that wants to chat about medical cannabis, but we do want to hear from you. If you have an interest in participating and we can't provide an opportunity for you to speak at one of the hearings, we will distribute any comments or any inputs you have to the committee members in written form. So, Senator Underman, any other comments?
If you want to introduce staff.
Yes, we have several staff members that have worked very diligently on preparing for this, and as many of you know, you don't get anything done without a lot of good hard work from folks. So Betsy Lynch from the House Media area. Let's see, Lynn Witten is General Counsel from the House side. I don't think we have any other House staff. Is that it? Brent Cranfield, who has kind of been in charge of helping us with the tech stuff. And then Senator Underman, I'll let you introduce your Senate side.
They can introduce themselves.
Okay.
Can
Yeah,
you
you
turn
want,
on their microphones?
we don't have the mics down there. You want,
That's okay. Go ahead.
okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. All right. Good. We're glad to have y'all here. And Lynn Witten. Yeah, yes, Lynn works with the Senate too. That's right, General Counsel or Legislative Counsel. So, thank y'all for all your hard work. Okay, let's jump into it. We're proud to have 3 presenters here today. 2 of them have come a long way, and so I'm our first presenter, a young woman many have gotten to know through the CNN documentary that she was featured on with her daughter. So, Miss Paige Figge, why don't you come on up, and we'll look forward to hearing your presentation. If you'll chat with us for a little bit, and then we may have some question and answers for you as well afterwards. The floor is yours. If everyone will please silence their cell phone if you have not done that already, so we won't have any disturbances. That includes me. I'm doing that right now too. So,
Thank you, Chairman Peak and Madam Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for having me. I'm here from Colorado. My name is Paige Figge, and I'm representing an organization, one of the multiple organizations in Colorado, helping these pediatric epilepsy patients with these oils, these cannabis high CBD oils. Charlotte was the first patient in Colorado, the first pediatric patient, and that was 2.5 years ago. So I'm here representing the company. I'm here representing Charlotte's story, and I also am asked to come out and speak to legislation. In the last couple of years, we've been doing this, and because a lot of these states that are illegal, they don't have a legislation passed. They don't understand what it looks like. They're afraid of regulations and pot shops, and they don't understand what this can look like. And so I come and explain very simply how this is. It's very simple. It can be very highly regulated. So just really quick, if you haven't heard the story about Charlotte, 2.5 years ago, she was suffering very badly from her syndrome is called Dravet syndrome, and it's a intractable, untreatable, very severe pediatric epilepsy. And what that looked like when she was 5 years old was 50 seizures a day. It was a typical day, a grand mal seizure every 30 minutes, and that's $1,200 a month. And so she was end of life. We had exhausted every medical option, and she wasn't a surgical candidate. We had tried every pharmaceutical, and so we essentially brought her home to die. She had lost every life skill. We signed a do not resuscitate, and brought her home. And living in Colorado, my husband was pushing me from Afghanistan to start researching cannabidiol, and the published medical peer-reviewed research out there at the time that you can find, and it's decades-old research, showed cannabidiol as an anticonvulsant. And so it wasn't that far-fetched to be reading the scientific data and saying, okay, let's go figure this out. Let's find a new therapy and figure this out. I researched the entire industry. At that time, it was 1% to 2% was lab testing, so we didn't even know what cannabinoids were in the plant, what phytochemicals were in what these people were selling. And it was in smokable form, and it was extremely expensive, and so we started this whole process and came up with this. I guess I came up with this with help from the research and formed an oil for her. I turned it into kind of like my own little pharmaceutical laboratory experiment on my child. And the efficacy on Charlotte was instantaneous and dramatic, extremely dramatic. So she went from her 1,200 monthly seizures down to 1 or 2 seizures, and she remains there 2.5 years later at just 1 or 2 or 3 a month. She is off of her pharmaceuticals, and she can walk, she can talk, she's not on oxygen, she's not on her feeding tube. So her life was a huge dramatic change, and it's been in the press. And that's terrific, and it's not just one story anymore. We have hundreds of patients, so we formed a whole organization and a nonprofit. We ramped up access. We came out with the story. It took us 18 months to wait and come out with the right venue for the story. We wanted a medical venue. And so that's the in a nutshell, Charlotte's story. And it's been astounding. And I still can't believe this child with Dravet syndrome, this is unheard of in the world, with no pharmaceuticals, has not had a hospital trip. So now we're seeing this with hundreds of patients. In the fall, in 2 months, we're adding 3,500 more patients from our Charlotte's Web oil that they renamed this product, coming from the plant that the Stanley family has created. So that's why I'm here to just explain what this looks like in Colorado and what you can have here. So you have patients here in Georgia, many patients here that, as you saw from that black and white photo of all those faces, they're refugeeing to Colorado. They're medical refugees is what the media is calling them. And they're leaving, and the families are splitting up, and the husband stays behind, and the mom takes the children out here, and they lose everything, and they're out there fleeing Georgia to get medicine in Colorado. And so we understand what we're talking about here, that the medicine I'm speaking about it fits into every category except for recreational. It is a dietary hemp supplement. And if you know about hemp, it is at every Whole Foods in Georgia right now. So if your children had hemp granola for breakfast like mine did, they eat hemp for extra protein. They can have that here in Georgia, but the sick children who don't want a refugee to Colorado can't have medicine to stop their epilepsy. The two are extremely different, the Whole Foods product versus these strains that are bred to be high in CBD are very, very, very different, but they fit into the same federal category, and they fit into the same Georgia state law category, and I just think that is unacceptable. So I'm here supporting whatever Georgia is saying that they will pass right now to help some of these kids right now so they can come home, so some of these kids don't have to move. This is adult patients as well and many other disorders, but if we're just talking pediatric epilepsy, you have a large population of intractable alone in Georgia patients that have no option for treatment. And this has shown an amazing efficacy. In Colorado, what we're seeing, we've done a couple retrospective studies on our patients. The first was mid-80s efficacy. That means 50 to 100% of the 85% of those patients. We're seeing 50 to 100% seizure reduction. The non-responders, the 15% non-responders, we're seeing 50% seizure reduction and below, which is still amazing, with a substance that has no side effects, no negative side effects. These kids have tried dozens of drugs. The drugs that these kids try are very dangerous. Some of them you're signing a waiver for death, for liver failure and death, to put your child on these drugs that are non-FDA approved, that have never been tested on a child, that you're paying cash from France and Canada to get these drugs into this country. The hospital can't touch them, and they have severe medical side effects. So what we're seeing is this new treatment that has an amazing efficacy rate. The third retrospective study we did was upper 70s, 78% efficacy. What was astounding about the numbers was the amount of percentage of the patients that had complete seizure control and had 100% seizure control. And that's with intractable epilepsy. If this is life-limiting, that's unheard of. That doesn't happen. A lot of people also ask, well, why can't we just purchase hemp? We see it imported. U.S. is the largest hemp importer in the planet. And why can't we just import this and use that? And you can go on Amazon and buy hemp oils. And you can go to Whole Foods and buy hemp cooking oil and seeds. The thing about the imported hemp is it's industrial. It's an industrial waste product most of these companies are using. Patriotically, I think this should be brought back to the U.S. That used to be the largest hemp producer on the planet, and I think that should be here. The fact that it can be therapeutic or medicinal is very important, but it's also an agricultural boon as well. So that is the difference between the products is lab testing, safety, the percentage of medicinal properties and phytochemicals in the plant. And the strains that we have in Colorado are bred for a therapeutic process. They're not industrial. And that's the difference. I just get that question a lot. I wanted to throw that in there. What we do in Colorado is we follow current good manufacturing practices. We are working with the APA. So we're a member of the AHPA, the American Herbal Products Association, and we're moving toward, this is a dietary supplement. So that's where we're heading with this. This is not a pharmaceutical. I don't call it a medicine. I don't call it marijuana, because this is a completely different thing, and this should be separated from that high THC argument. It doesn't have to be that highly regulated. And Matt Cook is here from Colorado, and he'll explain fully the regulatory process and how simple this could be to regulate, being that it is a dietary supplement, yet with amazing medical benefits. So we work with the National Safety Foundation to have good CGMP, and while we're not regulated right now by the FDA, we will be audited, and we will go through that process, and we actually exceed the FDA qualifications. So we're somewhere between a dietary supplement and a pharmaceutical. So the next thing we're really trying to go into is to study this and do the research. We need to know why this works and how this works. I mentioned the retrospective studies. The reason it's a Schedule I substance that poses a huge problem. This is a Schedule I substance federally, so it cannot be studied. And because it can't be studied, it will remain a Schedule I substance. So we do the state law reform that all these states are sort of trending toward. The 11 states have passed a Charlotte's Web type of bill, Charlotte's Web oil for pediatric epilepsy, and 3 states have passed a medical bill in 6 months. So state law is incredibly trending right now toward this. Research has to catch up, but it can't until a federal law changes. So they just dropped a couple weeks ago a federal bill in Congress, and that was 5226, and it's the Charlotte's Web Medical Hemp Act of 2014, and that would allow for more research, more competition for banking. It would drop the price, and it isn't just a monopoly here. This is a name they took because it's in the press. This is an amazingly huge thing, and this has to happen if Georgia would like to pass a bill and do research here. They both have to happen, federally and state. So HR 5226, we need support for that bill to allow for that research. We're currently going to do the research in South America because we want to be able to come back and say, here is the actual double-blinded placebo clinical trial on humans, and here's the actual efficacy rate. We just can't do that in this country, and it's much easier in South America. So we'll be doing that. So I think that the cautious, regulated approach that George is asking for is very doable. I stand behind that to get these kids home, to get these parents so they don't have to leave the state of Georgia. And I just urge you to consider the speed of this. This doesn't have to take a long, long time to do that. And that's why Matt Cook is here as this expert. He's an absolute world-renowned expert on language, on bill language. So I urge you to listen to him, and I urge you to consider the speed. These are life-limiting. These are kids that are dying waiting for bills to pass. And that is, like I always say, this should be a room full of scientists that we're sitting here speaking to about cannabis oil. And we're here taking this first step with legislation. And it's very frustrating because it's very slow. The process is extremely slow. But what a wonderful position and a very powerful position that you are in to stand up for something that is unopposable, unabusable. This is non-psychoactive, and you have the ability to help so many people, and it hurts nobody. It doesn't even hurt the medical marijuana fight. It doesn't even hurt the people fighting for recreational. This is completely separate, and it should be separated from those arguments. So I'm just here to tell you that this is worthwhile. I think that we're asking for the government to step out of the way so we can move forward with this, but I'm actually saying I would go a step further and say this is something that you should stand behind and you should be proud of. This is something that your state could be very, very proud of. And you should stand behind the patients in Georgia. These are your constituents. They are asking for this, and I really don't see any opposition as I travel through, and I've been doing this a couple years. I don't see opposition. The only opposition I see is financial, and which has been very, very eye-opening. It's pharmaceutical and it's financial, and I think that is a very telling argument. The other opposition we do see are the people fighting for full medical, which I am one of them. I'm assured the political climate in Georgia is not ready for that. So I'm fighting for the children who can have something now. And I'll continue to fight for all of the patients. We have thousands and thousands of high THC patients in Colorado, and it's an amazing part of the plant. But Georgia's just not asking for that. They're not ready for that. They're assuring us that will not pass. And so I'm here to fight for the ones that can have it. I'm here twice. So I was here once before, and I'm here again, and you're at ground zero again. And that's frustrating because you had a chance and it didn't work out. So I think that the Georgia residents not only need you to stand up behind them, but they deserve an explanation as to why this state hasn't passed anything yet. Thank you very much for having me here today.
Ms. Figge, thank you very much. And it's been admirable what you've done, traveling all over the country, fighting for this cause. Not only just for your daughter Charlotte, but for children all over the country. And so thank you for your work there on behalf of the Georgia citizens that have moved out there and seeing positive results. Thank you as well, too. You up for answering some questions? I know the members of the committee, we don't have a button you can push, so if you'll just kind of raise your hand, we'll go down the line. Representative Gravely, you're going to have to use the mic, so if you'll grab that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Figge, thank you so much for what you're doing, for where you're going. I know you've got a family back home as well, and taking time to be here in Georgia is very much appreciated. I just have a quick question. When Charlotte, how many seizures a day was Charlotte having on the prescribed meds that were approved?
When she was 2 years old, she was on 7 daily seizure drugs. And couldn't come off of them. 7 drugs doing the same thing, doing nothing. And she was having about 6 to 20 seizures a day, massive seizures. Some of these were status, longer than 30 minutes. When she was 5, she was having 50 tonic-clonic seizures a day. We don't even count the other smaller types. And that was on pharmaceutical drugs. And we also were suffering the side effects of these very, very medical, behavioral side effects of these pharmaceutical drugs.
So while she was on the approved drugs, she was having anywhere from upwards to 50 a day seizures.
Yep. Yeah, 50, 60, 40. That was a typical day.
And she was also on if I heard you correctly, she was on oxygen.
She was on oxygen daily. She was on an IV feeding tube daily around the clock. She had an IV pole that pumped her food into her stomach through a surgical hole in her stomach, and she requires neither of those. 3 months in, we stopped both of those. 3 months into the Charlotte's Web oil, she came off of both of those. And for the first time in her life, actually, she was eating and drinking. She had never in 5 years been able to swallow water. So that was
on her own.
On her own, yeah.
So that's what you were experiencing on the approved meds.
That's what I was experiencing. That's what she needed to survive while she was on drugs, and that's what she came off of when she. And I'm not anti-pharmaceutical. It was just that this is working, to that efficiency.
And so now she's off of those approved drugs, and she's been on the cannabidiol for 2 years. 2.5
years on the oil, and 1 month shy of that, she came off her last pharmaceutical 1 month into the Charlotte's Web treatment. So it's been almost 2.5 years she's been off of all her drugs.
2.5 years. And so could you tell us how many, again, just so I've got it right here in my notes, from upwards of 40 to 50 a day, now off the meds, on the cannabidiol, and how many seizures a day? She
has 1 or 2 a month in her sleep now, and they all self-resolve. They stop on their own. They're not status, a couple minutes long, 30 seconds to a minute or two long. So the duration of the seizure has changed. So 1,200 a month to 1 or 2 a month is what our count is.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. Other members that have questions? Ms. Figge, just one quick one, then we'll get to Doctor down here. How many patients do you have, or how many kids are receiving Charlotte's Web or high CBD oil right now?
I think we're at, the number varies as we add more people, but I think we're at 400.
Okay.
Might be over 400.
So of that 400, what percentage are seeing a reduction in seizure activity?
We see a 78%, the most recent study that we've looked at, just retrospectively, anecdotal, we see 78% have a 50 to 100% seizure reduction.
Okay, thanks. Yes, doctor.
Is this on?
Yep.
I just had a couple of questions. Thank you. This is a wonderful story, and I'd love to see patients do really, really well like this. My question is, your daughter was how old when she developed the epilepsy? Is it myoclonic epilepsy?
She has Dravet syndrome, and so her first seizure was at 3 months old, diagnosed at 2.5 years old. But it's a mutation. She has the SCN1A mutation.
Right. And then she had the seizures for 5 years in spite of polypharmacy, many drug therapy. And then 3 months, how soon after you started the cannabidiol did she begin improving?
The first week of her, the first dose, she went 7 days without a seizure. Wow. So that was 300. She didn't have that first week.
Was that a loading dose of some sort?
Nope. We came up with a titration schedule. I treated it just like a pharmaceutical. I only went up every 2 weeks. So I would actually let her seize. The second week, the seizures would return slowly. But I kept her on the schedule and started her at a very low dose. And we actually nailed it that first with this first patient, this first child, and everyone still uses, despite trying many different things, they still use this titration schedule. I just used research that was out there, and I've done this with so many pharmaceuticals with her before. It wasn't that brand new of information, but yeah, we really found the right dosing schedule. The patients all seem to fit into the bell curve of average therapeutic dose per pound body weight.
So you started with what you thought was a relatively low dose.
I started with a very low dose.
And yet you felt after the very first dose, she improved significantly.
A week seizure-free. They climbed back the second week slowly. I upped the dose every 2 weeks, and we hit our 99.9% seizure control at 7 months. 6 of that was drug-free.
I don't want to get too many details, but how frequent dosing was it?
She was taking it 3 times a day, sublingual oil.
And compared to the maintenance dose, what was the first dose proportionally?
Milligrams?
Well, okay, that'd be fine.
Compared to the maintenance, and we've actually backed off her peak dose. So compared to her peak dose, she was taking 12 times less. So she was at 1/12. Let's see.
So when you said when you first started the first dose, you mean the first week of dosing, not after one pill she didn't stop.
Right. I gave her her morning dose, she stopped seizing. I gave it her lunch dose and her dinner dose. So I was giving it 3 times a day. For that first week, she didn't have a seizure.
It's a great story. I just wonder, though, after you're giving 1/12 the dose at the very beginning, and she immediately stopped seizing, to your viewpoint. And it's a great and absolutely wonderful story, and I just want to believe that's true. I have no reason to doubt you. I just know there's a large placebo effect with medications, and I think that's why it might be very important to have placebo-controlled double-blind studies for this sort of thing. So I would love to see that happen.
I agree. We do need to see that. I don't know what happened with her. I don't understand it. I did see the seizures return, and when I would go up on the dose, they would dissipate. And the same thing until we reached this peak dose. I came back down to half of that, where she remains. And I continue to do little trials with it. And but it's a low dose is what she's on, and they don't become tolerant to it and need more and more over time. I don't understand why it happens so fast at that low dose, but I have it all charted, very pragmatic about it, and because I knew this would be, if it worked. I really didn't think it was going to work. I thought it was going to be like a end of life comfort measure. And it was astounding to see that. I see this in a lot of kids that are trying this in Colorado. It's not that unusual. She's remarkable. She had a lot of room for improvement. This wasn't a couple seizures a month or a year. This was easy to identify the dramatic improvement.
Thanks, Dr. Wynn. Any other members of the committee that have questions? Yeah. Senator Thompson.
And I do.
Yep. Yes, should be on.
Good. I do appreciate you coming out here, and I understood what you were saying about you're basically here very much in support of while you support the broader issue. You're here on the cannabinoid oil issue, basically advocating that do that now. You had indicated, you said you just felt Georgia wasn't ready for more than that. I didn't understand. Is that from polling data? Because if you poll Georgians, the polling data I've seen is that Georgians are ready for more. Are you talking about sort of what we call the politics of the possible?
I'm talking about the
politics of counting to 91 and 29
and the governor and the people who actually vote on the committees have assured me.
I just was trying to clarify because I didn't want, for the record, that we're not talking about the politics of what Georgians are for. You're talking about what you can get through what you believe you can get through.
No, the polling is Georgians are in favor of full medical.
I just full medical is a broader statement than that.
Yep.
I mean, it varies from state to state. There are 34 states, I guess, that have some form of medical marijuana, and full medical is different in different states.
Right.
Okay, that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Senator Thompson. Any other? Senator Miller.
Incredible understanding and grasp of the pharmaceutical nature and the application and the dosage and so forth. What is your background? Maybe I missed that earlier, or maybe it's in the file. And I mean, there's no better qualification than being a mother. Don't get me wrong. I'm not discounting that one bit. But what is your background?
Well, I went to school for pre-med, so I did have an interest in medicine and science. But I've just been their mom. I homeschool my 3 kids, and Charlotte's a twin. Her twin sister is homeschooled as well. So I've just been her nurse and doctor. And I think once you probably know the numbers, once you failed 3 drugs, seizure drugs, and you're trying your 4th seizure drug, that 4th drug has a 0.8% chance of working. And so we had to try them all. And so I just went through this so many times with so many drugs. And I think you really dig in hard when you realize it's going to be a serious, intractable epilepsy. You start to do your own research. And I like science and I like medicine. And so I just have a very deep personal interest. And that's all. I don't have any initials after my name.
Thank you.
Right. Any other members? One quick question. I know there's been a lot of concern. We've been hearing stories. The folks that maybe would be opposed to this are saying, well, the drug's not safe. It's got impurities. It's, these parents are so desperate they'll give their kids anything, and it's not being tested. And can you address that? I mean, obviously you gave this to your child. So, I mean.
And Heather Jackson and I co-founded the Realm of Caring. And because we were the first couple parents to try to do this, and we run this, and I do this for free. I'm just going to throw that in there. I'm volunteer. I pay to come do this. This isn't trying to monopolize. I have no financial interest in talking about Charlotte's Web oil. At this point, it is just to get access to these kids. So there's more Charlottes out there with success stories. But we felt very strongly about how it was done. So this had to be lab tested. We lab tested 4 times, and then we sent it to a third-party blind lab to test our lab. We have our own lab. We have a sterile tissue culture. We don't grow this from seeds. This is we're about to hire 35. I think there's going to be 35 people in the lab, in a sterile lab, running this and keeping this to our CGMP, like I said, that will go through the FDA audit. And we are treating it like an herbal supplement. So the APA is the organization that we run this through, and that's you have to go through these strict standards of quality control and cleanliness and consistency, to the point where we want to patent the process of consistency. So I demand a lab report is given with each patient's oil when they come pick up their oil every month. I demand that they are guaranteed to not run out of medicine once they get into the program. The medicine's consistent from dose to dose. Every milligram is exactly the same. It's grown organically, and so these are in the price. I've capped the price off, and then we fundraise for the patients who can't afford, who show financial. They need financial assistance. So I just feel very strongly about those things, and especially the quality control and the cleanliness, and we're transparent. So we have people touring, inspecting us all the time.
Right. And so you feel very confident that what you're providing is a safe and pure product.
I wouldn't have it any other way. This is my very ill 7-year-old child. Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Ms. Figgy, thank you very much. I know you've traveled a long way, and again, we really appreciate you making the effort to be here. It means a lot to our state that you're fighting for kids in our state, so we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, just real quick, I forgot to recognize a couple of staff. That Ms. Roma Amin, who's done yeoman's work on house research, thank you so much. Sorry I forgot you earlier. And Candace Blackware and Laurie Sparks, administrative assistants, who have done some great work too for Senator Underman and myself. Okay, our next presenter, Mr. Matt Cook, coming all the way from Colorado as well too. Mr. Cook, you're not near as famous as Ms. Figgy, so even though I do understand you were featured on a 60 Minutes documentary about this particular issue several months ago, but why don't you tell us, can you just briefly tell us about your background? I know, and as I've got to know, you realize that you're an expert, probably the foremost expert in the country on legislation that's been passed in states, the 34 states have been passed so far. So tell us a little bit about your background so the committee can know that you know what you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Madam Chair, members of the committee, visitors. My name is Matt Cook. I currently own and operate Cook Consulting, LLC. Just to set the stage, I'm the former Senior Director of Enforcement for the state of Colorado, Department of Revenue, and ran all the regulatory enforcement from that department. And in the year 2000, there was a constitutional amendment, commonly known as Amendment 20 in Colorado, which created a patient-caregiver relationship. And it essentially authorized the use of cannabis between patients and their caregivers, and allowed caregivers to grow 6 plants on behalf of these patients, 50% of which could be flowering or budding at one time. And it remained relatively dormant until the fall of 2009. And in 2009, United States Attorney, Deputy United States Attorney David Ogden came out with what's commonly known as the Ogden Memorandum, which essentially the industry asked for the United States government's position on the use of cannabis as a medicine. And the memorandum used the terms, as long as you remain in clear and unambiguous compliance with state law, you will not be a federal priority. The industry perceived that to be a tacit approval. And overnight in the state of Colorado, we had 1,100 unregulated cannabis businesses within the state. Being the Senior Director of Enforcement, part of my job, my responsibility was to review the legislation and quantify the fiscal and technical impacts associated with it. And I got the dubious honor and distinction of calling the bill sponsor and addressing this 22-page bill, which candidly did very little to regulate the industry in the state of Colorado. It's never a fun thing to do if you've ever had to do that. Nonetheless, the state representative, Tom Massey, listened to what I had, did some due diligence, said, Matt, what do you know about the marijuana industry? He said, well, candidly, in the 70s, I went through DEA school. I spent 2 years on the street doing narcotics work as an OSI agent. I worked for local government as a liquor enforcement officer. I have been in law enforcement my whole life. I know a little bit about the industry, certainly not an expert, but I know a little bit about the industry. And he said, you have 3 weeks to write House Bill 1284. That was something that I had to do from my home at night. In addition to my normal duties, I'm one of those that if I'm given a task, I give 150% and do it right, and I remained objective about that entire process, which is a whole other book, I think. But nonetheless, that expertise led to myself being the architect of House Bill 10-1284, which is the Medical Marijuana Act in the state of Colorado. Now, subsequent to that, I want to make it very clear, we've had Amendment 64, another constitutional amendment, which brought in the adult use or the recreational side of marijuana into the state of Colorado. I had nothing to do with that. It's not something I endorse. It's a law enforcement person in me, and that's something I don't think will ever change. I'm against anything that alters your state of mind except for medical purposes. But with that said, I continued with my regulatory consulting businesses, and I'm a nationally known 21st Amendment expert. That's really where my head and heart were years and years ago. And I have since helped, I believe, about 19 different states now with legislative and regulatory processes. And I've been asked to come here today to talk to you about that landscape. I hope to, today, before we're done, describe for you in very generic terms what the national landscape looks like. You'll find out that we really truly are, or are not, I guess, one nation undivided. We'll talk about what has worked throughout the United States, there's really three common elements, I think, that are critical for success. We'll talk about some of the successful regulatory elements. They're truly not rocket science. They're proven regulatory strategies that have been employed in the United States literally for hundreds of years. It's nothing that I created. I just took those best practices and applied it to this industry. What can be problematic and really what the state impacts are. This is, without a doubt, one of the most contentious public policy decisions I think states have to deal with. You can argue 10th Amendment, states' rights, but the reality is it's still a Schedule I controlled substance pursuant to federal law, and the federal government truly, at this point, appears to be taking a hands-off position with those states pursuant to a recent Deputy United States Attorney General Cole memorandum, as long as they meet certain regulatory tenets. So let's talk about the national landscape.
Mr. Cook, just a minute. Members of the committee, this slide presentation is in your folder. You should have, each of you should be able to access that. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to take you back to 2010. This first slide is really just sort of a snapshot of what was going on when I was asked to write House Bill 1284. And at that point, there were 18 states that had some sort of cannabis laws in the United States. It's very obvious to me public opinion is changing. Since 2010, support for legalization has increased in every major demographic and political group throughout the United States. It doesn't matter if you're a man or woman, what your race is, your age, your level of education, or your political affiliation. All those demographics have seen significant increases in overall support for marijuana. Some of the trends, it's currently a $3 billion industry in the United States, and some forecasts expect that to double by 2018. Total national legal marijuana market is estimated to be somewhere between $35 and $45 billion. Colorado was the first legal regulated adult use market in the United States. Washington followed shortly after that, and we'll get to that in a moment. And just to put it in perspective for you, you can see coffee and tea are about an $11 billion a year market. The U.S. beer industry is about $99 billion a year. So where are we now, 4 years later? There's truly three approaches we're seeing throughout the United States. And I should probably put it as the adult use market first, medical marijuana second, and hemp or the low THC third. But we're going to talk about these in this order. As it relates to medical marijuana, you can change the slide. Thank you. There are currently 23 states plus the District of Columbia that have some form of medical marijuana law in the book, either by a vote of the people or through legislative action. California was the first with Proposition 215 in 1996. Next slide. As you can see, the remainder of the states, there's some data there, the year it was passed, whether it was through a referendum or a legislative act, the amount that they charge, the possession limits, and whether or not they will afford reciprocity for patients living in another state. The second one is, as I said, the adult use to recreational market. This came online January 1st, 2014 in Colorado. Regardless of how I feel about it personally, I have to say the sun still comes up in the east and it sets in the west. Colorado obviously has seen a very robust economy for various reasons, and I'll get to some of that. There's also some problems that go along with that as well. Washington just came online, and it's really too new for me to even try to quantify the impacts that they're seeing there in Washington. The last is the one I think that has the most merit, at least for the state of Georgia. And what you see here on your overhead is a slide that lists all the states in the United States, whether or not they have recreational cannabis, medical cannabis, or CBD only. It looks at the population estimates, what percent that population represents in the United States. Then we talk about the population with epilepsy and the population with intractable epilepsy. Next slide. As you can see, there are, again, those 23 states plus the District of Columbia that have medical to recreation. This slide says 8. Subsequent to the putting of this, the building of this slide, there were 3 other states that have passed something on the low hemp variety, and that's Missouri, Florida, and the last state I believe was Ohio. Yeah. This is just a picture of what a cultivation facility looks like in Colorado. I bring that forward to you to show that this is a very organized industry. It's not probably how you would perceive it in your day-to-day operation. The cultivation side of things, generally people do not get to see. Plant disease is transmitted very easily amongst different gardens, and so they really limit access to these facilities. This is a retail outlet or a dispensary. Again, it's probably not what you would expect to see, but you can see the products are prepackaged. It's a very clean and orderly setup. And last, this is the marijuana plant itself. And then we have a close-up of the marijuana plant. Next slide. And this is really what they're after for use of it as a medicine. This is the oils, the trichomes, terpenes, and the cannabinoids, or the chemicals in the plant that they actually try to extract to use as a medicine. Little humor here. It's not what has worked on the cannabis side, but on the regulatory side. What kinds of things throughout the United States really are the states looking at when they want to implement these kinds of regulatory processes? There's really three common elements, I think, that you have to really engage in order to be successful with this industry. The first is you have to communicate with the industry. They're your stakeholders. In any regulatory process, I don't care if it's car dealers, I don't care if it's gaming, pick an industry. If you don't communicate with the industry, you don't understand what their concerns are, you don't understand what their issues are, you really will struggle regulating that industry. You have to have two-way dialogue. It doesn't mean that you have to buy into everything that they say, but you absolutely have to listen to what they say. The industry's been around for hundreds of years. I hate to tell you, but the genetics, the plants, everything is already here. Any law enforcement person in the office or in this room would tell you that. Most of the industry, those that understand the need for regulation, really what they're after is reasonable statutes, reasonable regulations, and reasonable oversight. Get them to participate in your rulemaking forums, your workshops, your committees, your subcommittees. They'll also help you understand what's going on in the black market. At some point, you're going to have a price point for this product within your state. Second is interagency cooperation, and this is a little bit of a sticky wicket, to be honest with you. One of these agencies or an agency within your state should have the primary responsibility for regulating this industry. They do absolutely have to communicate with other agencies, and that requires the interagency cooperation. Your public safety people, their concerns are obviously diversion and underage access. They're going to know where the hot spots are. They have to be involved with this conversation. The health agency, the Board of Medical Examiners, you called it something else earlier, they're going to regulate the doctors. And that was a very big concern in Colorado very early on. We called them pot docs, doctors just writing scripts to allow people to have access to this commodity. Nationwide, the average age of a cannabis user is 42 years old. It's a male. And chronic pain is 70% of their problem. Revenue for taxation and in some cases enforcement. Many of the alcohol beverage agencies throughout the United States are initially being tasked with the regulatory aspects of this. I can guess and say that this industry is following sort of the repeal of alcohol prohibition, and it does make some sense in terms of the methods of distribution, whether you have a control state where the state's involved with the regulatory processes or the distribution of beverage alcohol, or a three-tier system where you have a manufacturer, a wholesaler, and a retailer. They're all very common. The agriculture department, obviously you're going to be dealing with farming, pesticides, molds. You have something else called the Federal Farm Act that allows hemp to be grown pursuant to federal law within the states under certain conditions. It has to be regulated by the agriculture department, and you should have a university involved for R&D purposes as well. All of these people need to have some sort of common oversight, and they all need to work together, but one agency needs to have primary responsibility for a license, and the license is the regulatory footing, if you will, that allows a business to operate. Without a license, it makes it illegal, so everybody has to have a license. And as I said, reasonable statutes and regulations are the third. So I want to talk to you about some of the successful regulatory tenets, things that states are using, and I would offer to you that really the amount of this regulation that's necessary is really contingent upon the commodity that you're dealing with. If we're talking about a hemp product, as Ms. Figge described earlier, that has no psychotropic effect or no high, the amount of regulatory oversight that you want with it is probably minimal. I'll give you two examples. In Colorado, we issue about a $500 license, and it's $1 an acre. You have to give us grid coordinates of where your gardens are, and you have to allow inspectors unbridled access 24/7 so they can come and test your plants to make sure that they don't exceed the 3% threshold for hemp. In Missouri, Missouri said you can have 2 licenses for hemp. They, too, want grid coordinates. They issue a license. They require fencing around it, little higher elevated control. And both states require, before you engage in the harvesting and production to manufacture the oil, that you have to give the regulatory bodies the ability to come in and test, again, to ensure that you're not exceeding the 3% threshold. That's really the issue. Both states have what I call a vertically integrated or closed loop system. So you grow a product and you have to account for 100% of it from beginning to end. Some of the things, if you're going to have a recreation or a medical model, regulatory model, you obviously have traditional public safety concerns that go along with that. It is a very serious drug, there's no doubt about it, and there are huge issues that go along with it. Some of the things you can do, you can elevate the level of person that has the ability to do business within your state by requiring a very robust background investigation. Financial determination. Don't simply just ask where their money came from, have them show you where it came from. In other words, I don't just have $1 million in the bank, but I have $1 million in the bank because I sold this house or that house, or I have business earnings or whatever it is. Residency is one of the tenets that's used, and there are some legal issues with that, and I would encourage you to explore those if that's something that you're considering. Taxation. Have they paid all their taxes? Do all their state obligations, child support, any unpaid tickets? All those kinds of things, again, raise the bar for the person that can come in this industry. The use of something called a limited access area. Obviously, you're going to have a commodity like this. You don't want to just have open access to allow people to walk in and walk out at will. Limited access. Anybody that's in that area has to go through a background investigation, be licensed, wear a license on their upper half of their person, on their outermost garment, so that a video tracking system can see that they're licensed, and inspectors or regulatory people have the ability to review those tapes at will, or they can type in an IP address and watch what's going on. Licensees traditionally give up their Fourth Amendment protection as a condition of issuance of this license. It's a privilege and not a right in most states. Security systems, they probably have more security than Fort Knox, to be candid with you, most of these places. I have seen, I'm aware of an 80,000 square foot facility in the state of Colorado has pressure sensors in the roof of this building. If you're too much pressure, it sets an alarm off. They have laser systems around the perimeter. It's unbelievable the level of security some of these places have. Seed to sale tracking system, I'm a little partial to the Agrosoft DG.com. It's my product. I will freely admit that up front. But most states will have some sort of a seed to sale tracking mechanism to ensure that they can account for 100% of the product from the time that the genetics go into the ground to the time it goes to the consumer, and including accounting for 100% of the waste. So if the end product weighs 1 pound, for sake of argument, they have to account for 100% of 1 pound when it's all said and done. You need to really determine the method of operation, I guess. Some states are using a traditional two-tier system. You may see some 3. I've recommended that to the state of California, and they just haven't gotten there yet. Vertically integrated model is what we have in Colorado. Again, a retail outlet and a cultivator have to be accountable for 100% of what they're putting in the ground. I would encourage you to develop some controls over transportation. You can't just freely allow this to go travel across your public roads, your thoroughfares. I worked with public safety, our health department, and our IT section in the state of Colorado before I left to create an electronic protocol Just like when we clear people on the law enforcement side for driver's license or wants and warrants, there's a system in place. You get on your radio and you can call and they have the ability to clear. We set up a protocol to do just this for the transportation side of things, so that if a vehicle was stopped going down the road, the public safety people would have the ability at will to know whether or not it was an authorized shipment or perhaps it was something that was coming through the state or into the state from an unlawful or an illicit source. They had the ability to verify that and validate that at will. Whatever you do, you need to have both criminal and administrative sanctions. Candidly, the bad guys that are in this industry, and they're out there, there's no doubt about it, they will pay $100 fines all day long for the ability to do business. They don't care. If you take away their ability to do business, now you're getting into their pocket, and they have very big concerns, obviously. They don't have the ability to launder money anymore. So criminal administrative sanctions. Just to give you an idea, in Colorado, if you commit any kind of an offense, your license falls off the wall, license is regarded to be conspicuously posted in your facility. Technically, the regulatory body can levy a fine not to exceed $100,000 for every violation. And they can do it every day, every violation. There's no stopping that. It's a fairly good deterrent. Above and beyond that, they can prosecute them. They can arrest them, cite them, and you can do both at the same time, almost like a RICO action on the federal side. So there's a lot of incentives, shall we say, to be compliant. And candidly, like most other industries, be it the liquor industry, be it car dealers, pick an industry you want. If people are going to make this kind of an investment in an industry, they really want to be compliant. They want to protect that investment. It's those that don't want to be in this industry that you have to watch out for, or don't want to be regulated that you have to watch out for. So do those regulatory tenets work? Here's a recent article from the Brookings Institution. It was dated August 8th, which essentially says Colorado has created a smart regulatory system, balances safety and security with access to legal marijuana. State impacts, Colorado teen marijuana use continues to decrease now, and just to be fully transparent about all of this, we have a law enforcement side of things in the state of Colorado, HIDA. Public safety people will know about HIDA, high intensity drug trafficking area. They just recently released a publication, and I tried to copy the slide to put it in here, but there's stuff you can't copy. She's smiling, she knows what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, I don't know. Data is one of those things that candidly can be manipulated for whatever purpose you want, and everybody knows that. Lastly, the impacts on the state of Colorado. I mentioned a few of them. We've got record tourism, strong economic indicators, real estate. Just on the medical side alone, in 2010, we had over 1 million square feet of leased space for cultivation, just cultivation. And we've had very few problems on the regulatory side. So what doesn't work? As I said, the plant has been here probably for decades. If you do nothing, choose not to regulate it, it's going to continue to flourish. Your public safety people are going to continue to fight this battle, spend tons of money, and I don't know that really they can win the battle. So no regulatory framework is really a deal breaker. You need to have something in place to regulate this industry. It's here. Regulate it. Caregivers. This is sort of a double-edged sword too, because caregivers are really a necessary, I'll call it a necessary evil for a patient. Some patients are homebound. They don't have the ability to get in a car and drive to a pharmacy or a dispensary or a location to pick up the things that they need. They have to rely on somebody else, so they need the caregiver. The issue with the caregiver is if you're going to have them and you're going to allow them to produce, you must regulate them. Because if you don't, the surplus product is going to feed the black market. If you know where it's at, you know what they're growing, you can regulate it. If you don't know where it's at, you don't know what they're growing, it's going to end up on the wrong side of the fence. If you just decriminalize, that is, if you pass a law that simply allows the possession of a hemp oil, such as Charlotte's Web, and don't penalize them for it, really what you're saying is we're going to allow you to use it, we'll recognize it or validate it as something that has efficacy for these children, but you have to go to another state and pick it up, and you have to drive it across state lines. You've just violated many state laws as well as the federal law by doing that. So please don't pass the buck. I would urge you not to do that. Overregulation and higher taxes. you can really take this too far. But I will go on record to say this is truly a public policy decision, and only those that make those decisions know what they're comfortable with. We can give you the tools. I'm happy to help you give you the tools. But if you overregulate this industry or you overtax it, you will push those people to the black market. In addition to that, it also increases the cost of the things that they're making, and they're just going to pass that on to the patient, who's going to pay more for their meds. So we've talked about the national landscape. I don't know that we're truly one nation undivided on this issue. We're very, very divided on this issue. We've talked about what has worked, the 3 common elements for success, some of the regulatory elements, what can be problematic, and some of the impacts to the state. I welcome the opportunity to assist the great state of Georgia in their endeavor moving this forward, and I'm happy to be a resource for you. Any questions?
Mr. Cook, I think we probably have a lot of questions for you, so members of the committee, we'll probably tee it up. Let me just ask one real quick. I want to just make sure, because this was relevant to what happened in Georgia last year. We kind of, at the end of the day, got down to just a protection from prosecution for possession bill that did not provide a cultivation model. So I'm hearing you correct. What you're saying is that basically, from your experience of watching what's happened in 34 other states, that is pretty much a meaningless exercise, even though I guess families could go to Colorado and bring it back. But the real solution for a true, effective medical cannabis program would be cultivation and regulation of it in the state. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, yes, and let me expand on that a little bit. If you regulate the source of it, and you put in some fairly sophisticated labeling products, and you have an online list of those that are authorized to have access to the commodity, when a public safety person stops them and they find X, a quart of this, and again, I'm just making something up, they don't know the source of that. They don't know if it came from another state. This is a very potent marijuana oil, right, is a very potent substance, unlike what we're talking about here on the hemp side of things. The only way you're going to know tell the two apart, is to do a chemical analysis. You're putting your public safety officials in a very precarious situation. They're going to have to take the product, go have a chemical test. The kid is going to have seizures and is going to need access to it. Is it legit? Is it not? Okay. In the short run, you might be able to do something like that. I still don't encourage it. I would tell you, create a license, allow for the mass production or cultivation of it under limited circumstances, and control it from beginning to end. Okay,
thank you. Madam Chair, we'll defer to you first. You got a question? No. Nope. Okay. Representative Golub.
I got you right there. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Cook, the first thing that you said that got my ears perked up with was the expression best practices. Obviously, the states are running the gamut in terms of what they have done over the course of many years, from the narrow exception for, I guess what I'd call the non-THC oil, all the way up to and through recreational. Obviously, we've looked at it much more so, if not completely, in the context of the non-THC oil, specific purposes, specific conditions, really trying to narrowly tailor it to the author's intent. Is there a state out there, or are there a group of states out there, and understanding that it's a fluid situation, there are measures that are pending right now? Are there, from your experience, what state or states generally reflect a place to begin a look in terms of best practices for us, for a state that is at least starting and possibly confining itself to the non-THC oil for specific medical conditions, et cetera?
Okay. Good question. Thank you. There's 2 states that I would look at right off the top of my head. The first is Missouri. I spoke to their regulatory model a little bit. They limited licenses. They only have a couple licenses. They require fencing. It's a hemp product. It requires testing. As I said, a web-based protocol. All those things are in place. The New York, and they stole from the Minnesota model, they only allow the non-smokable kinds of products to be used, and they too employed minimum licenses. 5 licenses, limited licensure. That's a huge key. So just to put it in perspective, Colorado had 1,100 places overnight. We created a vertically integrated model to account for everything. So 1,100 retailers now had to have 1,100 cultivation facilities. That meant I had 2,200 licenses right out of the box. Mm-hmm. Is it much easier to regulate 5 good-sized locations, one in the north, south, east, and west, and maybe the central part of your state from a public safety standpoint, or would you rather have 1,100 scattered throughout the state?
One follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
The you mentioned about the various. We saw a checklist in the PowerPoint of agencies as to who's involved and why. And I don't take issue. I'm not in a position to take issue with who's involved and why. I know that different states have different looks at it. But there has to be ownership. There has to be someone or something in charge. I'll couch the question in terms of I understand that our revenue department, as an example, has jurisdiction over a laundry list of it, but not necessarily every revenue department. But clearly, over the course of time, there have been those models, state to state, that have worked better in terms of jurisdiction. Not that other agencies shouldn't be involved; they need to be involved. But somebody has to be in charge. Just from a functional standpoint, what's been your experience in terms of those management models, from an agency standpoint, a government agency standpoint, that have actually worked with the fewest bumps in the road from an implementation standpoint?
Thank you. Probably the most common approach throughout the United States is it does start with the ABC, the alcohol beverage control entities within the states. They understand a multiple tier system of distribution. The commodity, and I don't want to draw parallels to alcohol because I think they're very separate and distinct drugs, although on the recreational side.
We do have the 3-tier system here, just FYI.
You do? Okay.
Yes, we do.
Great, yeah. And so they'll understand that process and the regulatory process. This is really a game of regulating widgets, candidly. And I used that analogy many times while I was involved with this process. I can regulate any widget you want me to regulate if you give me the resources and the manpower to do it. And your regulatory people are probably in that same boat. Somebody's going to have to draw the short straw, just like I did. And hopefully they will take their challenge very seriously and move forward.
Do you see any, just one follow-up, on the enforcement side, what have you seen from a practical standpoint in terms of not turf battles, but just conflicts between law enforcement and the regulatory side in terms of, or the ability to collaborate and cooperate as states have implemented a new program like this that for many jurisdictions is pretty off the grid?
It is, and that's a very good question. In 2010, when our regulatory model first came out, I reached out to our agriculture department because we're dealing with scales, and they're the ones in the state of Colorado that certify the scales. I reached out to our health departments, and we have a local health department as well as state health departments, because we're dealing with, in my world anyway, foodstuffs. They're making edibles, and they're going through various practices that have sanitary requirements. Those agencies wanted nothing to do with this regulatory scheme, so my agents had to get trained to go out and do this. It's a whole different world today. Today, all the health departments, the health agencies, the agriculture departments in the state of Colorado, they have very valid concerns about it, and they're very, very much involved. So I think probably the lesson there is that they can work together, and your agriculture department could communicate with some of the other states' agriculture departments that have these initiatives up to find out what their issues are, what works and what doesn't. Again, going back to those best practices. And a little communication goes a long way, right?
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
What do we got on the line? Representative Kaiser, you got any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to know if you could speak a little bit to how you limit licensure.
Happy to. There's a number of ways to do it. A number of states are doing it by lottery, and I don't endorse the use of a lottery. I don't endorse the use of a lottery because you don't know what you're going to get. I believe if you raise the bar enough, you will, just by the natural process of elimination, eliminate many of them. Many states are requiring the posting of a $2 million cash bond. That's very common throughout the United States. I don't know if too many people have $2 million that they can let sit in a bank. when they're dealing with a Schedule I controlled substance for the federal government to come seize. That's really what it's about. I mean, if the federal government really wanted to get that money, they could, right? Enough of those barriers to entry, and I use that term loosely, you could set it up demographically by county or venue. Some states are doing that. Florida has done that. They've divided their state into 5 districts, counties within each district, and they'll allow license within each. That's a very common way to do it. And it could be a combination of all those factors.
Can I follow up?
You sure can.
Do you have any states that you know of in your research that limits it, say, just to academic institutions?
So when you say limit to academic institutions for cultivation, just for R&D?
I would say for cultivation, but I mean, I could see academic institution having the concern about it still being illegal at the federal level, but from a standpoint of academic study and cultivation, I just wonder if there's anybody that has limited it that much.
There's been a few that are trying to go down that road. Missouri's probably the closest in that they have the Department of Ag as well as higher education involved. The problem with it is you're dealing with many institutions that get federal funding dollars,
Right, exactly.
and you will jeopardize that.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go down. Senator Miller, you got a question? Dr. Burke? Senator Thompson, you have any questions? Senator Gravely? Dr. Gwynn, any questions for this? Mr. D.A. Spejos?
Be happy to respond to that. So the issue was, if you just decriminalized the possession of it and didn't allow for the cultivation of it, what would the issue be? My response was they would have to go to another state to get it, or if they were found in possession of it here, you wouldn't know what the source of it was. Did it come from a cartel? Was it from another state? Is it a valid source? Does it meet the test? In other words, is it something that has less than a 3% threshold or whatever you're going to establish from a public policy standpoint, or is it truly hash oil that has a high 30 or 40% THC content? You wouldn't know those things unless it came from a regulated process.
So it's your position that the only way to do this is to legalize cultivation in Georgia?
I would recommend that you regulate it, yes, absolutely.
And from your consulting business, I see now, do you primarily work on that industry that cultivates and manufactures?
I have no interest in the industry at all. No, I am an arm's length regulatory consultant.
I'm going to fire a couple of questions, then we'll go. Just in your expertise, if Georgia were to draft legislation that would provide cannabis oil for citizens with intractable seizure disorders and terminal illness, compassionate care use, just so we can give an idea to our citizens so that they know. Give us how you would draw it up. If I came to you and said, draw it up, draw us the best plan in the country based on what's happened so far. Can you give us a little bit of the framework of that, and then also give us a timing of how long it would be before it would be available and accessible to our citizens? Is that a fair question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. It's a mouthful, though.
Yep. Give it a shot.
Let me first start by saying, obviously, the public policy decision, when it becomes law, that's when the clock would start running. But from that point going forward, it's a minimum of 6 months, probably closer to a year. Just the genetic side of things is going to take about 6 months, and that's assuming you have an infrastructure already in place.
Before it would be available to citizens, okay.
So if you were to create something in the interim on a short-term basis that allowed them access to it.
A protection from prosecution for possession type scenario.
Correct.
Okay.
And you were to put together perhaps a work group or a panel, a subject matter within the department or the regulatory agency that would regulate this commodity so that they could establish rules and processes going forward. That takes another 3, 4, 5, 6 months, depending upon how your Administrative Procedures Act here is in Georgia, and I'm not familiar with it. Mm-hmm. Most of them require notice, 30 days notice, you have hearings and so on. As I said, you need to have all the stakeholders involved with that. That process alone for me, there were 22 specific rule-making mandates in House Bill 1284, things that our General Assembly candidly didn't want to deal with. They were very hot, contentious issues. And I brought together 30 members. I brought the chiefs of police, the sheriffs, the drug investigators, health department, lawyers. I had 2 doctors, local government, county government, the activists from the industry. I brought together the growers, the retail side of things, the infused products manufacturers. And we sat in a room over a period of 5 months, met twice a month, 8 to 10 hours a day, and promulgated rules. And it was really, I would say, an education for all of us, including myself. And the dynamic of this on day one, an L, or sort of a U-shaped conference room that was standing room only, my law enforcement people are on one side, and my quote-unquote drug dealers were on the other side, and myself and my staff were in the middle, and they wouldn't talk to each other. At the end of the 5 months, they truly better understood each other's business and concerns, and together I think we crafted something that truly did create the first regulated medical process in the state of Colorado, and it worked. Then along came Amendment 64 and muddied the entire water, and that's the full recreational side of things.
Okay. Well, let me just get you back to that, though.
Yeah.
I was wondering, okay, but to answer the question of if I said, if we were to draft a bill, get it passed, it would need to include an immediate access for families to take the risk to possess the product inside the state of Georgia. That would be an immediate solution. It would need to have that part. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
And then it would need to have a cultivation piece, highly regulated, with a high bar for licensure. And under that scenario, from the date that the governor signed the bill, we should be able to have something in place to our citizens within 6 months to a year?
Closer to a year, yes. The other piece of that needs to be validated, though, is the medical profession really needs to chime in to talk about the parameters for the usage.
Diagnosis.
Yes.
That would be
what
qualified.
debilitating diseases should this pertain to? I would urge you to set or establish a board of those professionals that would have the ability to amend that list, so you don't have to bring it back before the General Assembly every year.
Okay.
Give them that discretion.
Okay. One final question. There's this H.R. 5226, which is the federal legislation that's been introduced by Representative Scott Perry out of Pennsylvania, I believe, is a potential game changer, I believe, if it were. Can you tell the committee a little bit, just real briefly, about that bill, what it would do, and what impact that would have if it passes on what we would look at from a state legislation standpoint as well, too?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be happy to. H.R. 5226 really is a low THC, high CBD bill, and it would remove from the Schedule I Controlled Substances Act at the federal level products meeting those conditions having less than a 3% threshold with CBD, and it removes cannabidiol from the Controlled Substances Act as well. And that's at the federal level, and most states currently have a Controlled Substances Act at the state level, and it mirrors or echoes the federal law. And so my guess would be that if the federal legislation would pass, it would allow for the manufacture, cultivation, production of this, and then broad-based distribution across state lines pursuant to federal law. The state laws would then have to be amended to allow for the interstate transportation as well.
So H.R. 5226 could pass, and if Georgia does nothing, it would still be illegal in Georgia to possess hemp or cannabis oil with a THC level of less than 3%. Is that
Mr.
correct?
Chairman, I believe that's what's in your Controlled Substances Act today.
Okay,
And
I
if that's the
think that is
case, that would
correct.
be accurate, that perhaps
Yeah,
the
we would
DA
have
could
to-
address that. Yeah.
We would have to take action in Georgia. That's correct. Okay, final. Yep. Right. But we would have to take action to make that happen, I believe. Okay, Mr. Cook, thank you very much. It's been very
Certainly
informative. We sure appreciate you being here and taking the time, and thank you for lending us your expertise. We sure appreciate it.
It's my honor. Thank you.
Okay, we've got one more presenter, Mr. James Bell. Mr. Bell's with Executive Director of Georgia Care, I believe. Is that correct? And so if you'll take the opportunity to kind of tell us a little bit about your organization and what you do, and then give you about the same thing, 10 or 15 minutes to chat, and then we may have some questions for you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I've gone from bifocal to trifocal, so I swap out here. First, thank you. What an education we just got. I think I know a little bit about this issue, but every time I hear people speak about it, it's quite an educational experience. First of all, thank you for the opportunity here. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I think Representative Peake, thank you so much for bringing this issue forward. I think we all recognize the historic aspect of what's happening here. I think Georgia is moving, like the rest of the country, toward medical. How we get there, when we get there, that's all to be determined. So we appreciate you so much. And I know there's a lot of people in this room that really appreciate the efforts with this committee and everything that's been put forward. I am James Bell. I represent Georgia Care. It's the Campaign for Access, Reform, and Education. We formed a couple of years ago to basically educate the public about cannabis. Our mission was to educate about the medical use, about the use for pleasure, the use for industrial hemp. You know, cannabis is used by people, probably your neighbors, probably members of your family. So cannabis is used right now in Georgia for medical and for recreational purposes. So we're trying to figure out how best to deal with this without criminalizing so many people. Support for cannabis law reform is strong in Georgia. In January, there was a poll taken. About more than 60% of likely voters said they would support decriminalization. This is beyond medical. There's even less people supported medical in this state. Since the session and since this debate has happened, I think it was a television poll showed almost 80% or over 80% of people support medical in Georgia. So it certainly brought the awareness up of people around the state. The legislature, certainly we see not only support from the public, but we also see support from our legislature. Virtually unanimous support of some type of legislation here. So we know that the time is right here in Georgia to move forward with these issues. Regardless of what legislation is passed and approved, it needs to be signed by our governor, and we hope that those who are seeking office will speak up and speak out about their position. We need to know when we go to the polls where our elected officials stand on these positions. So perhaps get involved and ask our elected officials where they stand on this issue. So what do we want? We are a growing movement in Georgia that has had we have felt the impact of prohibition. I speak for hundreds of people who have emailed us, who have called us, people who have told us some of the most private things of their lives that they wouldn't tell anyone else. They talk about the pain, the suffering, the misery, how cannabis has changed their lives, how cannabis has made them a better person, has made a better quality of life. We want legislation that allows for whole plant therapeutics, not limited CBD oil, not clinical trials with a limited number of people. We want to help not only the children, we want to help the people with glaucoma, We want to help the people with cancer. We want to help the people with HIV and AIDS. We want to help Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis, epilepsy, wasting syndrome, Crohn's disease. Post-traumatic stress seems to be one of the number one issues that I get calls and emails about how it's changed my life, changed their life, and how it has improved their life and the quality of life. I heard from Chris. He's a Purple Heart recipient. He was blown up too many times in war, and he has post-traumatic stress, and he has brain injury. He says that cannabis helps him and has changed his life. I've heard from Stephen. He has a message for you. He says, we only ask that you stop persecuting us, stop destroying our lives and families, that you allow us the freedom to use the medicine that physicians are recommending. We are not criminals. We are fathers and mothers, sons and daughters. We are soldiers. We are laborers. We are lawyers and executives. We are engineers and athletes. There's Justin. He uses it for anxiety and other conditions. I talked to Julie. She has glaucoma. Remember back when we had the original bill in Georgia? The only thing it included was cancer therapy and glaucoma therapy. We need legislation that certainly, at least, includes those conditions, because Julie has gone through her eye operations. The doctor said, this is all we can do for you. We're going to give you some eye drops. It is not reducing the eye pressure. She's concerned she's going to lose her eyesight. She found that cannabis helps her lower the pressure down to a reasonable level that will help her. Unfortunately, she is drug tested at work and threatens, her job is threatened and her freedom is threatened because she has no legal access to cannabis. I talked to David. He has back problems. The doctor got him addicted to some very powerful medications. He smoked some marijuana. The doctor tested him. The doctor kicked him out of the program and said, go someplace else. I can't treat you. So he ends up going to basically sitting with drug addicts at a drug clinic, getting alternative medicines to try to not only deal with his addiction, but to kill some of the pain that he's feeling. So he has nowhere to go. And, I talked to Ken. He said it's a plea for mercy. He has some trauma issues in his life, and he said that cannabis certainly helps him. I talked to Ed. He's a chronic pain sufferer from back conditions. And an alcoholic, quite frankly. And he said not only does cannabis help him with the pain, he said it helped him get off alcohol. And that he said it made him a better person. He says, just ask my wife. So he speaks from one perspective. There's Jack. He's 67 years old, lives in Alpharetta, has 2 back surgeries. The back surgeries left him in more pain than the original pain he started with. And so he says that he found that cannabis helps him. I can go on and on. One story I do want to share is I just got a call from an attorney. He has a client. She's 60 years old. She grew a few marijuana plants in her backyard. She's now facing more than 10 years in prison. She has an Emory doctor who is willing to testify to her for her that she needs cannabis for medicine. In Georgia, we don't even have medical defense in Georgia. Most judges will kick that argument out and won't even allow a patient to explain to a jury that I have medical conditions that cannabis could help us with. What is interesting about all these testimonies is the similarity with the stories of the parents of the children with epilepsy and the adults. They're saying, yes, we have medical conditions, but the drugs they're being given seem to be more harmful than the actual medical conditions in many aspects. They seek an alternative treatment. I have to go back to 1988. Let me talk about safety. Okay, cannabis and safety. What we know is it's relatively safe. We know millions of people use it daily with virtual or little side effects. We know that 23 states allow it. We know that no one has died of any toxicity from cannabis. relatively safe. We can't even say that about water. We just had a young man die from water intoxication in Douglas County. So we have to compare relative harmfulness when we talk about safety on these issues. I have to go back to 1988 when the normal organizations sued the DEA and the federal government over the scheduling, and the judge looked at all the evidence, and he concluded something really incredible. He says the evidence in the record clearly shows that marijuana has been accepted as capable of relieving the distress of a great number of ill people, and in doing so with safety under medical supervision. It would be unreasonable, arbitrary, and capricious for the DEA to continue to stand between the sufferers and the benefits of this substance in the light of the evidence of the record. He continued that in strict medical terms, marijuana is far safer than many foods we consume. He cited eating a certain amount of raw potatoes can actually have a toxic and potentially legal effect on a person. By comparison, it is physically impossible to eat enough marijuana to induce death. Marijuana in its natural form is one of the safest therapeutically active substances known to man. By any measure and rational analysis, marijuana can safely be used within the supervised routine of medical care. And that came from Judge Francis L. Young, and it's one of the quotes that's been quoted forever to advocate for medical marijuana. So we're asking, what does the laws and the bills look like? What we recommend is to define what legitimate medical use of marijuana is, requiring a person to seek, for those who seek legal protection, there must be a significant, serious condition, debilitating, etc. We need to define that. Provide at least one of the following means, preferably all three of these. Number one, to permit patients to cultivate their own. Permit primary caregivers to cultivate and to help the patient. And to authorize non-governmental organizations to cultivate and distribute marijuana to patients and their primary caregiver with participation from their doctor. You know, we need to have input from the doctors. In Georgia, it's going to be a new field. We're going to have to educate doctors. Doctors will educate themselves about how best to use cannabis. We may have only one chance to get it right in Georgia. Other states have led the way. We have the ability to create a bill that is compassionate and can improve the quality of life of so many people. Thank you for your time and consideration. If I could, I would like to know is, how many people here either have medical conditions that cannabis helps or someone in your family? Would you raise your hand? Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the time and opportunity, and I'm open to any questions.
Mr. Bell, we may have some questions. I saw Ms. Kaiser push your button. Representative Kaiser? Oh, sorry. Any questions from the committee? Doctor Gwynn?
I'm Matt Gwynn. I'm a neurologist, and I have a list in our packet of 18 drugs that have been withdrawn since 1996 that were initially approved by the FDA as being safe. Some of these were studied under thousands of patients, but under millions of users, it was found to have adverse effects that were so severe that they had to be withdrawn. Are we sure, it's a bit of a rhetorical question, but are we sure that the widespread use of marijuana in a medical use, without clinical trials even, would be a safe thing for the 9 million people in Georgia?
Well, safe to compare. Are we going to compare it to the medicines they're currently under and the risks they're taking? I think with everything in our lives, there is a risk factor. I think that we have millions of people all over this country. We have a number of states. We have people in this room who are using cannabis, and they will tell you and testify that to them it's relatively safe. They will say that compared to what the doctor just gave them, they're ending up with liver conditions, they're ending up with stomach conditions and bleeding, they're ending up with mental conditions and addictions. Is it safe compared to that? I think everything is relative here, that there is a risk factor in everything we do. We can't say it's perfectly harmless. we can say it's relatively harmless. By the way, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm an activist, and I will leave that debate up to the doctors. We do have available many doctors and professionals who are out there practicing cannabis therapeutics today who are willing to testify and are willing to answer those specific questions. But I think we have enough knowledge to know that I've never known anyone die from cannabis or have liver disease or a lot of these conditions that we're seeing with pharmaceutical medicines.
Can I follow up, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I really hope it works. I totally do. I really want this to be that whatever product the 32 active substances in cannabis were, I would love to see them be medically useful. A follow-up question, though, is what if we do these studies for epilepsy, for Parkinson's disease, and for so forth, and they end up being negative? How would you then approach your argument to the legalization of these substances? Would you have to then retreat a bit, or would you continue?
Well, I think we would deal with it like we deal with other drugs. You know, we have drugs on the market that are approved by the FDA, and we find out, well, they're killing people, and so they withdraw them from the market. And so we would look at it in the same fashion. You know, what effects does it have? If it you know, the doctor will give you a medicine, and you say, well, doctor, it's making me crazy. I can't drive my car, and I can't go to work. Well, they take you off that medicine and try to find you another medicine. Maybe it doesn't work for everyone, and maybe it does have some side effect. But, again, comparing that to talk to these parents and talk to them about what medicines they're currently receiving, we should probably be asking more about the safety of those drugs than we are about cannabis.
Actually, I wasn't talking about the safety there. I was just simply saying if it turns out, as many other drugs that seem to be very promising turn out not to be effective, would you still advocate for the legalization of your product?
Well, I think the evidence is overwhelming that it is helping a lot of people. I think there's a lot of medical research. There's been hundreds, 700 some studies all over the world. Israel has been very beneficial in doing research. And, you know, I welcome. We have to look at both sides. What's the positive side and what's the negative side? And hopefully this is what we're doing here. We'll hopefully hear from some medical professionals that will tell you the benefits. If there's someone who knows any side effects or bad effects of it, hopefully they're going to come forward. I think we would see screaming headlines in the Atlanta newspapers that people are dying or people that it's not effective, it just doesn't work. I want to talk briefly about the THC aspect. That, you know, THC, to my knowledge, is no more harmful than CBD. There seems to be a stigma, a taboo, a superstition about inhalation. That may be, in fact, the best way to deliver medicine to a person. We have inhalers of other medicines that we inhale into our lungs that go directly and are instant and help people. So I think that we need to look at the whole THC issue. Not only THC, there's, like you said, many compounds that either work separately or in combination. And hopefully with these 20-something states, we're going to be able to determine what is best. And we certainly are not the pioneers right now. We have other states that we can look at. I would say look to the doctors in the other states that are actually practicing this on the daily basis and see what effects they're seeing.
Dr. Gwynn, you done? Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Mr. Bell, thank you. Appreciate your
testimony. Thank you so
much. Senator Underman, you got any final thoughts or comments you want to make? Yep, we'll be in Macon on September the 10th at Mercer University, where we'll be hearing from patients and families. So we'll look forward to that. We've got a very diverse group of folks who are going to come chat with us.
What time is that?
That will be from 1 to 3 also.
Going to have lunch there for the committee?
Members of the committee will probably be eating at Cheddar's is what I'm hoping. I hear that's a good restaurant down that way. Fine establishment. All right, and then we'll go October 1st to Georgia Gwinnett College. Then October 22nd will be at GRU. We don't have the room assigned yet. We're working out the details on that.
Is that going to be all day?
That'll be 1 to 3 also. Yeah, all the.
Don't have time?
If we need to expand it, we sure will. We may need to at that one, so sure will.
I think that one.
Let me, before we break up, let me thank you for being here. We desire and want input from our citizens on this issue. As you can tell, there are a lot of diverse views. There's a lot of passion. The ultimate goal of this committee is that we find a solution that works for our citizens, providing some hope and relief in a safe and effective manner. So thank you for being here. Appreciate your time. We are adjourned.